Ready to make some noise? Hello my friends, Gleb Alexandrov here for CreativeShrimp.com. Welcome to yet another Blender tutorial. In this quick tip we'll have a look at how to recreate this peculiar animated noise texture in Blender. It'll take some 10 minutes I guess, and I will try to walk you step by step through the process. So ironically it's all about Denoiser, but first we need a scene. Any 3D scene really doesn't matter, so I decided to pick this one. HDR pillars, love that one. So here's the plan. We're gonna use cycles to generate a lot of noise in our scene, and then we're gonna use the denoising algorithms of Blender to make something unique and interesting out of this noise. Sounds pretty crazy, but let me try to explain. If you use Blender 2.90, at least you have the denoising options available for you within the sampling tab. By default, the render denoising is set to NLM. We will need to change that to Optix, but in order to do that, you need to have the NVIDIA GPU available, unfortunately, as much as I dislike the status quo. Anyway, here's why we need Optix in this case if we are aiming to get a unique brand of grain. The NLM denoising, the default one, when coupled with this small amount of samples, produces this kind of effect. While it's pretty neat in its own way, what got me attracted to the Optix version of the effect is how it treats the noise, as strange as it sounds. So let's have a look. The key point is that if you have set up your scene in a certain way, and I will show you how to do it in a moment, you will get this type of highly textured grain, very stylistically interesting. I even think that partially that could be a bug, but it can be exploited, and that's why we're gonna use it. There is the third option though. Disable the render denoising altogether, then head over to the Compositor tab and add Filter Denoise node. Under the hood it's the Intel's OpenImage Denoiser, very potent stuff, which does exactly what it's meant to do. It removes the noise in the most efficient way possible, and it doesn't require the NVIDIA GPU. Actually, this denoise node is the same as setting the viewport denoising to OpenImage Denoise, with maybe some slight visual differences. But again, in this particular case, for this tutorial, it's completely missing the point. You see, Optix in certain conditions doesn't entirely remove the noise. It leaves a little bit of texture in there, or even imagines a little bit of grain, and that's what makes it so appealing. So returning to our scene, that's why the first thing I did is activated the render and the viewport denoising and switched both options to Optix. Next we can tinker around with the aspect ratio. I would like to see something wider, Panavision style. Okay, and here's the trick. Down the sampling panel, let's set the render samples and the viewport samples to 1. Just one sample for each pixel. Surprisingly, it still looks kind of decent with the viewport denoising turned on, but under the hood it's a lot of noise. We just need to utilize it creatively, and for that reason I will add the volume shader. Yes, that's logical. When you want some additional noise, the principled volume shader is at your disposal. And right off the bat we can see that we succeeded in filling in the entire scene with the noise. A lovely path tracing inefficiency that we're gonna use to our advantage. We can let more light to punch through by reducing the density of the principled volume shader. Or on the contrary, if you would like to achieve a broken TV style of noise, you can crank it up. The anisotropy parameter works in a kind of an interesting way. It shifts the way the light spreads in the fog. You can play with it. I think I will keep the density pretty high. And we can even colorize the noise a little bit. Alright, awesome. One thing that I wanted to emphasize before moving on is that the number of light bounces, especially the volume bounces, is super important. According to the way that the path tracing engines work, having 0 bounces produce less noise than having 1 bounce, for example. And double so when it comes to the volume bounces that are known to produce humongous amounts of noise. So in our case, the number of volume bounces can be used to fine-tune the characteristics of the noise. So in most scenes I have been testing this effect, I ended up switching the volume bounces to at least 1 to give Optix this little extra bit of noise to play with. For example, here is the 0 volume bounces and 1 volume bounce with the optics turned on. The way it looks to me that that extra volume bounce is a secret ingredient. And as a measure of controlling the way the light spreads within the volume, within the three-dimensional noise, we can add extra light sources like the point light over here, and it looks pretty neat already. And now we can enhance our motion graphics by adding the title. Shift A, text, position the text within the scene tab to enter the edit mode for the text. I'm gonna type in something like, I don't know, massacre, for no apparent reason. And I noticed that the text is apparently mirrored. That's because the camera was mirrored on the x-axis. I'm gonna press Ctrl M and X twice. Ctrl M, X, X, to mirror it back to its initial state. And now it's a matter of adding the emissive material to the text to let the light from the text punch through the noise and through the fog, I should have said. And what I love about this effect is that it's art directable. You can move the text back and forth to bring it into clarity or make it murky. So on the one hand, it's chaotic and totally unpredictable because of the way that neural network-based algorithm of optics works. On the other hand, you can try to art direct it. It's an awesome creative struggle. Okay, we can now post-pro our thing by adding the glare node. For some reason, at least in my memory, this type of noise is associated with a broken TV set, so adding a little bit of glare, like the screen glare, kind of makes sense from this perspective. It comes from the same aesthetic domain. Alright, and from here we can branch into different styles of rendering. For example, we can try to squish the dynamic range to something absurd, like 0.01. Or maybe it's too much, maybe 0.1 instead. So that's one of the ways to approach it, to deliberately squish the dynamic range, throw in some chromatic aberration with the help of the lens distortion node, projector, increase the dispersion to get some chromatic fringing effect that looks very appropriate in this context. But personally, I would like to keep all the dynamic range available to us, at least until we render it out. So I will switch the clamping to 0, and then I will adjust the text emission shader to make it slightly warmer, and also I will increase the intensity of this light shader to make it illuminate the surrounding noise, as strange as it sounds. We're playing right now with the neural network interpretation of the three-dimensional noise caused by the volume shader. The stylistic properties of this noise can be controlled via the density property of the principled volume shader, via the location of the text, because as you move it further away from the camera, it gets swallowed by the noise to a higher degree. So that's the one way to control it, and also pay attention to the resolution. This effect very much depends on the final resolution of the render, not only in terms of interpolating pixels and stuff like that, but the core properties of the effect depend fundamentally on the amount of pixels available. For example, at 40% it looks like this. Compare it to 100%. Crazy, right? Much more Lord of the Rings style smearing going on. And obviously, to fully unlock the potential of this effect, we need to animate it. Thankfully, we're one button press away from it. So head over to the seed menu and press the clock icon to tell Cycles to use the animated noise seed. We can choose a different noise pattern, but it doesn't matter much in our case. Once again, the render and viewport denoising were set to optics. Now we can just choose the output folder, some lossless format like PNG, TIFF, or OpenEXR if you want to go linear. But I've chosen TIFF for the simplicity of it because I won't be post-processing it after rendering. Now it's a matter of rendering our animation out, but first we need to adjust the number of frames. I think 24 will be more than enough. Obviously it depends on the type of the scene, on the type of the animation, but with a static camera I think it will be enough for us to loop this small sequence to make a larger video file in the end. And now it's time to assemble the video. But first we can check the animation for consistency from within Blender. And in my opinion, 24 frames per second is a bit too high for this one. I think it will benefit from lower frame rate, if that makes sense, even from variable frame rate, maybe stop motion style. And one thing I forgot to mention is that the type of the noise and the noise levels even depend inherently on the color management. So by adjusting the exposure and the look, and especially the view transform, you can change the characteristics of the noise. Obviously, it's best to keep the view transform as it is, well, filmic. And now we can proceed to video editing. I'm gonna go new, select the video editing preset, add the movie, or rather the image sequence, because we rendered out the TIFF sequence. So I'm gonna select all the TIFF files and click on add image strip, Shift A to preview it. And one thing to keep in mind is that the resolution of the movie should align with the resolution of the output. Otherwise it will get stretched. And as for the frame rate, I think we can drop each second frame or something like that by switching the FPS to 12. Initially it was set to 24. It will help with this lovely painterly look. Now I will just Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V the sequence a bunch of times to increase the overall video length. And I think we're good to go. At this point the tutorial is pretty much completed. One extra step that we can take is pretty exotic. We can record our screen with the OpenOBS Studio or other screen capturing software right within Blender to try to capture some of the lovely glitches. Here I'm picking the random spots in the timeline to capture some of the adaptation glitches, because when you switch the frame, Optix takes a few iterations to fully reveal the denoised image. And I won't be showing the full process here because it will probably lead us into weeds, but the idea is to screen capture the Blender viewport with the adaptation glitches and then overlay it on top of your original animation. It will require transforming and cropping the footage, all that stuff, but it will look something like that. Let me show you. Could be appropriate for a horror movie intro sequence. The possibilities are endless. The last step, as usual, is to render this mess out. I will count the frames. So we got 95 frames. So we can type in 95 in the end. Great. Check the frames per second, set to 12. For the final output, I will go with the FFmpeg video. MPEG-4 as the container, H.264 for the video codec, and I think we just need to set the outputs and hit render animation. And oh my god, I love using Denoiser in such an ironic way to create stylistic representation of some noise type that wasn't available straight out of the box, and that was brought into existence with the help of denoising algorithms. Crazy. The glitch art is dreadfully interesting direction of computer graphics and of graphics and visual imagery in general, and I'm sure we will keep digging in this direction. Stay with us. Thank you so much for watching. That was Gleb Alexandrov for CreativeShrimp.com. Feel free to subscribe and share, because that's always appreciated. And while the world seems to be a crazy place right now, stay optimistic and safe. And I'm sure that we will change the world of computer graphics.